What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's video. And I'm yet again going to try making a podcast version of this video that includes role plays in it. So hopefully those are translating over to audio format decently enough. But if you have any feedback, feel free to leave a comment so that I can make adjustments accordingly. I don't know about you, but for me, I have an easy time finding resources to help clients manage anger in general, but I have a bit of a harder time finding information about how to help clients manage angry outbursts when they're happening live in session. So in today's video, I thought I might as well share the approach that I've kind of honed in on, generally speaking, for when one of my clients is having an angry outburst in session. And the disclaimer that applies in just about every video is I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on anger or angry outbursts, but I am a therapist and I do have clients who get angry or have an angry outburst in sessions sometimes. So I'm just sharing the tools that I've come to develop over time. I'd like to specify that this video is taking a look at how to navigate angry outbursts in session and not looking at how to do anger management in general. So this could be applicable to any client who has a burst of anger in session. I think all of us have had that happen to us at least at some point, right? So of course, ideally, we love it if we can catch the anger and address it before it turns into a full-on outburst. But sometimes we may not catch the clues depending on our client, or for some clients who haven't developed enough emotion regulation skills yet, it's possible for them to go from 0 to 100 in an instant without any forewarning. When I'm talking about angry outbursts, I'm referring to diffuse physiological arousal. Try saying that 2 times fast. A lot of folks in the field refer to this as emotional flooding, or it's often referred to as the fight or flight response. Whatever terminology you like to use to refer to this physiological response, all of our bodies are capable of entering this state where essentially we perceive a threat and our systems all create a physiological activation so that we can respond to the threat as though it's an emergency. When the level of activation that we experience gets intense enough, we can cross over a threshold into that emotional flooding fight or flight response where we now have to kind of ride the wave out. We can't just like shut down that emotional response and calm down immediately. So when ideally we're able to catch those emotions before they get so activated that they cross that threshold past the point of no return, then we can use our therapeutic orientation of choice. You know, if we're utilizing IFS and our client is demonstrating anger, but they haven't crossed that threshold of activation that they're so flooded, then maybe we might like to explore which part of them is feeling angry right now, what is that part of them trying to protect them from, etc. Or if we're utilizing DBT and they haven't crossed that threshold of activation yet, then we might use our emotion regulation skills and ultimately get them to a point of either problem solving or taking opposite action. But in my opinion, and based on my own observations of working with clients and seeing this happen, once clients cross that threshold and they're having a full-blown fight or flight response, then all of those tools that we typically use to help navigate emotions go out the window. They don't work anymore. From my perspective, universally, once somebody has crossed that threshold, we need to help them calm their nervous system and also give them some tools to help them ride the wave of their nervous system sort of running its course. The reason for this is once we've entered that fight or flight response, our brain and our body enters an emergency response mode and it shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that we tend to be speaking to when we're doing our sort of processing in therapy. Now, the reason our bodies shut down this section of the brain is to optimize efficiency in case of emergency. When we are in fight or flight mode, we are activated and ready to fight or flight. Or flee. Like if you're in your home and it catches on fire, there is no time to pause and reflect. Think about the pros and the cons of all of the potential options for how you might respond to this situation. No, we want our bodies to activate and be ready for go time. We need to get out of that house, put the fire out, do something, but we're not going to stop and think about it right now. So when our clients are at that level of activation while they're having an angry outburst in session, no amount of let's explore what might be happening here makes sense. While I'm talking about this, my mind goes to that fire drill scene in The Office where Dwight tries to simulate a fire by lighting an actual fire, and he's trying to use, logic and reasoning to help everyone stay calm, think clearly about the procedure. Meanwhile, it's absolute chaos because everyone is panicking. There is no reasoning with that activated state once we've gotten there. I'm so sorry. There is some sort of airplane swirling around. It's not stopping and getting louder, so the show must go on. Now, if I completely miss the memo that my client is emotionally flooded and I keep trying to explore what's coming up for them, it can actually have the opposite effect where they feel misunderstood and invalidated. I'm just really angry. Okay, let's take a look at it. Where do you think the anger might be coming from? I don't know, okay? God, you don't even understand. So instead, what I like to do is when this happens, I pause whatever it was we were doing and pivot our focus towards calming the nervous system while increasing my client's ability to tolerate the discomfort of all of the emotions that are going on. In many ways, no matter what emotion is behind that level of emotional activation, once you cross the threshold into fight or flight mode, the response is the same, whether a client is in the middle of having a panic attack or if they're having an angry outburst. Okay, now that I've talked your ear off probably for way too long, let's actually talk about what I do when I see that my client is having an angry outburst. First, as soon as I catch on to it, I like to validate the anger. Keep in mind, this isn't the moment to have a long-winded conversation showing your validation of their anger because their prefrontal cortex is not engaged right now. They can't really listen to you sharing all those details, but I think it is helpful to just take a moment and acknowledge that you see that anger. I'm just really angry. Okay, I can see that we just touched on something really upsetting. And I know how tempting it can be to become defensive when our clients have an angry outburst at us, but it's so important not to become defensive. In fact, usually when we become defensive, it just causes the emotional intensity to go up even more for our clients because they feel invalidated. They feel like we don't understand. I do understand. I'm here to help you. And then I let my client know that we're going to pause whatever it was we were doing so that I can make sure they're okay and tend to what's coming up for them. I can see we really struck a chord in this conversation, so let's pause this topic for a moment. I just want to make sure that we're not causing your system to get emotionally overloaded. Then I like to check in to see how distressed my client is. Some people refer to this as their SUDS, which stands for subjective units of distress. If that's a term that you're already using with your clients, you could always just say, what's your SUDS? If it's not already in your repertoire to use SUDS with your client, this isn't a good moment to explain SUDS because, again, the prefrontal cortex is not engaged. So then I just like to ask, what's your distress level right now? 10 being through the roof, beyond what you can tolerate distress, and 1 being so chill that you could practically fall asleep. Okay, I just want to check in for a second to see how intense things are for you right now. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest level of distress you've ever experienced, and 1 being so chill that you're practically falling asleep, where would you rate your emotional distress right now? Like a 9 out of 10? Okay, so your system is really overloaded. At this point, if this is the first time that this has come up in therapy, then I let them know that we're about to pivot into some tools to help calm their nervous system. So your system is completely overloaded. Let's pivot away from what we were talking about for a moment and help calm your system down before we come back to where we left off. And then I step into utilizing a tool or sometimes multiple tools that can help calm the client's nervous system or increase their ability to tolerate how uncomfortable the distress is while they ride the wave of the emotional activation. And during this phase in the process, it's very important that whatever tools we're using are helping the client mentally step away from whatever the threatening feature was that activated their anger. If they're going through the motions of whatever tool you're utilizing, but in their mind they're still seething in anger, thinking about whatever was upsetting to them, then it's just going to prolong that activation state. There are a lot of tools available that can help calm our nervous systems, and I've found that that depending on the client, some are very successful and others not so much. So it's kind of a matter of finding that sweet spot of which tool or tools tend to be useful for that particular client. But with that said, here are some of my go-to tools that I'm willing to try with almost everyone to see which ones work for this client. First, I always like to have some mindfulness technique at the ready at all times, like on call. If I need a mindfulness technique, I have one. More recently, I've started using a brief recording on panic from Headspace that's available for free on YouTube. It's like 3 or 4 minutes long. It's super quick. At any point, I can just hit play and Andy Petticombe can take the baton away. I found a lot of my clients find it helpful to have the mindfulness practice be a third-party recording rather than me reading a script or, describing the mindfulness practice, especially when they feel anger, because a lot of times it was something I said that made them feel angry. So it's helpful to have something that kind of pulls them away from that. I like this particular recording because even though it says it's for panic, it's effectively utilizing tools to help calm a client's nervous system and step out of that fight or flight mode, which applies to the angry outburst as well. If you're interested, I'll link to that particular recording below so you can check it out too. Another tool I like to use in a moment like this is body movement. Of course, your body is activated as though it's ready to flee or fight. So you have all this pent up energy that might be helped if you could kind of let it out of your body. Now, you don't have to be running sprints or even doing intense jumping jacks for that matter. I read in a DBT book, I think somewhere, don't quote me on that even intense clapping for a bit of time can release that energy. Or even if your client likes to kind of shiver, then that's another way that you can encourage your client to let some of that energy out. If we're doing an intentional body movement together, I like to do it together with my client just so that they feel supported as they're trying to calm their nervous system. You can also do a deep breathing exercise or a progressive muscle relaxation exercise, anything that kind of distracts your client's mind from whatever is upsetting them. I found that some clients also find it really helpful to have something physical, tactile that they can interact with to help distract their mind. So I like to have some sort of like fidget toy, brain teaser puzzle, or even like coloring available for a client to utilize as long as they're coloring about something that they find relaxing. If I've run through these strategies and my client is just incredibly activated, then another tool that I'll try is something incredibly cold. So if you have access to having like an ice pack in the freezer or like frozen veggies or something like that, if you meet virtually, you can encourage your client to see if they have something like this in their freezer that they can either hold in their hands or even better place on their head if it's safe to do so, then that can help calm the nervous system. I know this technique might sound a little bit silly, but this is the T from the tip scale in DBT, where essentially I guess the research shows that if somebody is immersed in something cold, then it sort of hijacks the physiological system to calm down. And if somebody is immersed in something warm, then it activates the system. So you can utilize those to either bring somebody who's a little bit deactivated, like if they're more depressed, to become more activated, or if somebody's having something like an angry outburst, something really cold can help calm their nervous system down. I was learning about this tool recently in a DBT skills training, and the way it was described is like if you've ever jumped into a really cold pool or in the ocean when it was really cold, and there's that moment of shock where you can almost feel your system shut down. That's the body's way of preserving itself when it thinks it's going to go into hypothermia. So if you can find little signals to cue your body that it needs to chill out, almost literally, then sometimes that can work for some clients. Now, often as I go through some of these tools, I can kind of tell just by watching my client how they're doing. I mean, if you've ever been with a client when they're in the middle of an angry outburst or a panic attack or anything that's at that level of activation, you can usually see it all over their body. So usually, once I see that my client looks like they're starting to calm down a bit, I'll check in again on their level of activation. So again, you could ask, what's your SUDS on a scale of 1 to 10? Or if that's not terminology that you already utilize together, then it could just be, okay, what's the intensity of your emotions right now on a scale of 1 to 10? Okay, I want to check in again. On a scale of 1 to 10, how intense is your anger right now? About a 4. Generally, the rule of thumb is once that number's dropped by about half, then the activation has come down enough that it's safe to check in to see, okay, what kind of triggered that anger and problem solve anything that needs to be problem solved. Now, if you check in and the intensity is still pretty high, like it's only come down one notch, then just keep coming back to some of these same tools. It may just be a matter of enough time needing to pass for the nervous system to calm down and ride out the wave. And then once their system has calmed down by about half on that 1 to 10 scale, that's when I like to debrief what happened and make plans for whenever this might come up again. When we go through this debrief, I like to kind of tell my client why it was that I just walked them through that whole pivot that we just took away from whatever was activating their anger. And the reason why I save this conversation for the end is because if I had brought it up earlier when they're in that activated state, their prefrontal cortex is not available, so it would have just gone in one ear and out the other, and I would have had to explain it all again anyway. Okay, I realize I took us on this giant pivot without explaining what we were doing, so let me kind of go back and debrief what we just did together. So I saw that you were getting activated, and we know from research that once we get past like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 on that scale, our bodies are so activated that we're no longer able to access reason anymore. So we can't sit down and kind of talk through what was making you feel angry. All humans go there when we feel like there's a big threat, so it's completely normal. And it was important that we pause to help you come back down a few notches before entering back into our conversation again. You did a great job following my lead, so thanks for pivoting with me. How are you feeling now? Still angry, but I feel like I can stay more calm now. I'm wondering if you're feeling ready then to potentially go back and rewind, see if we can figure out where it was in our session that you noticed the anger start to come up for you. And then you can invite your client to also debrief, like which of those tools were helpful? Was there anything that I said or did in there that wasn't helpful? So that next time an angry outburst comes, we can kind of streamline our process and help them get to center a little bit sooner. And if there's time and if it's appropriate, you might also consider reflecting on whether this type of angry outburst ever happens for the client outside of your sessions, and if so, to reflect together on which of these tools might be applicable that they could start trying and using live in the moment. Now, as distressing as I know it is to be sitting with a client while they're having an angry outburst, trust me, I know it's not fun. Ultimately, it is a wonderful learning opportunity, especially if this is something that's happening in their day-to-day life, or even if it's something that they've managed to sort of repress and hold back from their day-to-day life, and it's just funneling into your session together. It's an opportunity for them to learn how to experience their emotions, tolerate their anger, move through it in a productive way. So every time an angry outburst happens in session, if you help your client navigate it well, it becomes an opportunity for them to practice carving out a new neural pathway so that they can utilize it in their real life outside of session as well. So it is a good thing, even though it's terrifying. And of course, if this does keep happening over and over, particularly with the same client, then you can keep modifying the steps each time it comes up, and you might be able to start streamlining it. I've noticed in time that with practice, a lot of clients will start implementing these skills without me initiating it. I may not even have noticed yet that they're starting to approach that angry threshold, and they will tell me, I need to pause, we're getting close to that threshold, or even I crossed that threshold, can you help me? I can tell I'm starting to get angry. I haven't crossed that threshold yet. I'm at like a 5 out of 10. But I think I need to pause from our conversation. Or they might start utilizing some of the mindfulness practices, some deep breathing, or fidgeting with something that helps them feel grounded, whatever it might be, without me needing to prompt. And that is a wonderful thing when that starts happening. Well, that about sums up how I tend to approach, most of the time, angry outbursts in session. Now, I haven't touched on things like if you believe that you're in any sort of danger when this happens, or if it becomes a pattern and it keeps escalating, that it's getting worse and worse for your client each time it happens. We'll save that maybe for a different video. For today, I just wanted to touch on some tools to help de-escalate a client when they're in that state. I'd love to hear from you all if you have any go-to tools that I didn't touch on here as far as, when your client really has crossed that threshold into the full-on angry outbursts. What helps them navigate it or calm their system? Anything that helps you navigate it well. Also, if it is happening on repeat with your clients, I definitely encourage you to get some consultation as well to make sure sure you're supported as much as possible and that your clients are getting the best care that they can. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well. Another tool I like to try in a moment like this, a moment like this.